We have more important things to do, Mama. Those were the words my son Billy Ray texted me on the day of my 65th birthday. I was sitting at my dining room table, surrounded by gold balloons and a chocolate cake I had baked with my own 2 hands, just like every single year for the past 15 years, ever since his father had died. 51 missed calls. That's what I found on my phone the next morning. 51 times they had tried to reach me after I had sold the house I had bought for them, without telling them a single thing. But that morning, as I counted each and every one of those missed calls with the same coldness I'd felt when I was signing the sale papers, I remembered exactly how all of this had started. It was a Tuesday in October when I had decided to plan my birthday dinner. I'd been getting ready for weeks, buying all the ingredients for Billy Ray's favorite cake, the same kind he'd loved since he was just a little boy. I had even sent out my own mother's old dining room table to be refinished. The whole house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla when the baking was all done. I'd laid out my embroidered tablecloths, the linen napkins I always saved for special occasions, and I had even cut some flowers from my garden for a centerpiece. Everything was just perfect, just as I had always tried to make it when my family would come to visit. By 6 o'clock in the evening, the table was all set for 4, Billy Ray, his wife Crystal, my granddaughter Savannah, and me. I had spent the entire afternoon cooking. I'd made an herb-roasted chicken, some creamy mashed potatoes, a fresh salad, and those little dinner rolls that Crystal loved so much. The golden afternoon light was streaming through the dining room windows, creating that warm, cozy atmosphere that always just made me feel like all was right with the world. I had lit the candles, I had put on some soft music, and I had sat down to wait. The chicken was getting cold. The candles had burned halfway down, and I was still just sitting there in my chair, wearing the blue dress I'd bought especially for the occasion, looking toward the door every single time I would hear a car on the street. At 8 o'clock I decided to call. The phone rang 5 times before Billy Ray finally answered, his voice all distracted, as if he were multitasking while he was talking to me. Mama, I'm so sorry, but we're just not going to be able to make it. Something came up with Crystal's work, and Savannah has a big school project that's due tomorrow. His voice was just flat, emotionless, as if he were just canceling a dentist appointment, not my birthday celebration. We'll celebrate some other day. Yeah. Before I could even respond, he had already hung up. I just sat there in the silence for a long, long time, the phone still in my hand, just staring at the perfectly set table that now suddenly looked like an empty theater stage after all the actors have gone home. The candles were still burning. The food was still warm. But the house was just filled with a silence that hurt more than any shout ever could. That's when the text message had arrived. We have more important things to do, Mama. Not even a proper apology. Not a belated happy birthday. Just that one cold sentence that had just stabbed me right in the chest like a knife. That night, as I was packing all the food up into plastic containers and blowing out the melted down candles, I didn't cry. Something strange was happening inside of me. Something that took me days to even identify. It wasn't sadness. It was a kind of a cold awakening. Like when you realize you've been living in a dream, and you suddenly just open your eyes to a completely different reality. They should have noticed the signs long before. Now, sitting out here on my new deck a few hundred miles away, I can see it all with a crystal clarity. All the little moments that I had ignored. All the strange conversations I had just let slide. All the little glances that Billy Ray and Crystal had exchanged when they thought I wasn't watching. The truth is, I had been blind for months, maybe even for years, just believing that I was the perfect grandmother and the perfect mother-in-law, the one who was always available, the one who never said no. It had all started 6 months before my birthday, back in April, when Billy Ray had shown up at my house with a folder that was full of papers and that same little smile he used to wear as a child when he was about to ask for something. Mama, I have a proposal that you're just going to love, he had said, settling himself onto my living room sofa while Crystal just stood by the window, looking out at my garden with an expression that I now understand was just poorly disguised impatience. We've found the perfect house for us, but we need your help with the down payment, Billy Ray had continued, extending his hands toward me in that same gesture I knew so well. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Mama. A house in the best neighborhood, with a big yard for Savannah, and it's near all the good schools. His eyes were just shining with a genuine excitement that I hadn't seen in years. And my mother's heart had just melted instantly. The house had cost $450,000. They had saved up $70,000, but they had needed me to put in the remaining $150,000 for a proper down payment. It's only temporary, Crystal had insisted, finally approaching the sofa with a smile that I now recognize as being completely calculated. In 6 months we'll pay you back every single thing with interest. Billy Ray just got that big promotion at his firm, and I have several big design projects that are just about to be confirmed. I hadn't hesitated for a single second. That very afternoon, we had all gone down to the bank. I had taken the money from my life savings, the dollars that I had scraped together from working as a secretary for 40 years, from cleaning offices on the weekends, from selling my homemade pies at the church bake sales. I had handed over all of that silent sacrifice without a single second thought. Because I had seen the happiness in my own son's eyes. Because I had wanted my granddaughter to grow up in a beautiful home. Because I had believed that's what mothers did. They gave everything for their children's happiness. But there was something else. Billy Ray had asked me to sign some papers, to facilitate the legal process. You know how these things are, Mama, he had explained, as I was signing document after document without even reading them completely. It's just to get everything properly registered, to avoid any trouble with the IRS. His voice had sounded so confident, so professional, that I had just trusted him completely. After all, he worked for a real estate company. He knew about these things far more than I did. The first few months after the purchase had been lovely. Billy Ray would call me every single week to tell me about all the improvements they were making. He had sent me pictures of the garden they were planting, of the room they had decorated for Savannah. Crystal had even invited me to lunch a couple of times, showing me furniture catalogs and asking for my opinion on the paint colors. I had felt included, important, useful. But after my birthday, something had changed radically. The calls had become scarce, distant. When I would call them, they were always busy, always in a hurry, always had something more urgent to attend to. "We'll call you back, Mama," had become the most common phrase in our conversations. A promise they had rarely ever kept. It was Savannah who had unknowingly given me the first real clue about what was really happening. My 16-year-old granddaughter had shown up at my house one Saturday afternoon. Her eyes all red from crying and a look of confusion on her face that had just broken my heart. "Grandma," she had said, sitting down at the kitchen table where we had done her homework together so many times. "Why are Mom and Dad talking about selling your house?" "My house. Not our house, not the house we bought together." "Your house," Savannah had said. The world had just stopped for a moment, like when you're watching a movie and someone suddenly just pauses the frame at the exact moment that changes the entire story. "What did you say, sweetheart?" I had asked, trying to keep my voice calm while inside. I had felt something just shattering. "Yesterday I heard Dad on the phone with someone," Savannah had continued, nervously fiddling with her hands. "He said that they already had a buyer for Grandma Grace's house, that they were going to close the deal next week." She had paused, looking at me with those big, worried eyes that she had inherited from her grandfather. "But Grandma, isn't it your house? Why would they sell it without ever asking you?" In that very moment, sitting there in my kitchen with my own granddaughter, I had understood that I had been the biggest fool in the entire world. That night I couldn't sleep. I had stayed awake until 4 o'clock in the morning, just sitting on my bed with all the papers I had signed 6 months earlier spread out all across my comforter, trying to understand the words that now took on a completely different meaning. A small table lamp was casting these strange shadows on the documents, and the more I had read, the more my blood had just run cold. It wasn't just a home purchase. According to the papers that were in front of me, I had transferred the full ownership of the house to Billy Ray and Crystal. My signature was there on every single page, authorizing the total transfer of the $150,000, not as a loan but as a gift. I had signed papers that had made them the sole legal owners of the property. I wasn't a co-owner. I had no rights to that house. Officially, I didn't even exist in that transaction, except as the person who had handed over all the money. I had gotten out of bed like a sleepwalker and I had gone to my computer. My hands had trembled as I had typed the house's address into a search engine. And what I had found had just taken my breath away. There it was. House for sale. Excellent opportunity. Price, $595,000. The photos had shown the very house that I had paid for, But with all these upgrades and decorations that had clearly cost a fortune, the garden had looked spectacular, with all these new plants and an automatic sprinkler system. The kitchen had been completely remodeled, with all these stainless steel appliances. The floors had been replaced with some Italian marble. But what had hurt the most was reading the description. Beautiful family home, sold due to the owners relocating out of state. Not a single mention that this very house had been paid for with the life savings of a 65-year-old woman. Not a single word about the sacrifice, about the nights I had worked late sewing just to save up that money. About the weekends I had spent cleaning offices just to give them that opportunity. I had kept on digging like a private detective in some mystery film. I had found Crystal's Facebook page, which she had been updating constantly with all these photos of the house, presenting it as our perfect home, and the result of so much hard work and saving. In one particularly elaborate post she had written, "Thanks to God and our hard work, we finally have the house of our dreams. Anything is possible with some dedication." The comments had been full of congratulations from all their friends and family, who obviously didn't know the truth. But there had been more. So much more. On Instagram, Billy Ray had been posting all these photos of a new car, a silver sedan that had to have cost at least $50,000. In his active stories, I could see all these pictures from some expensive restaurants, a weekend getaway to the beach, some designer clothes. All of it paid for with the very money they were supposed to have been paying me back within 6 months. At 5 in the morning, as the sun was just beginning to peek through my window, I had made a decision that would change everything. I was going to confront them, but not as the hurt and confused mother I had been up until that very moment. I would arrive prepared with all my evidence, with some specific questions, and with the coldness of someone who had finally opened her eyes. I had showered, I had dressed in my best navy blue pantsuit, the one I always wore for important occasions, and I had carefully applied my makeup. I had wanted to look strong, dignified, like the woman who had worked her whole life and who deserved some respect. At 8 o'clock sharp, I was ringing the doorbell of the house that I had paid for but that, legally, no longer belonged to me. Crystal had opened the door in just a bathrobe, a coffee mug in her hand, and a look of surprise on her face that had quickly just morphed into something that resembled guilt. "Grace, what a surprise. So early," she had said, without ever inviting me in, partially blocking the entrance with her own body. "Billy Ray has already left for work. Did you need something specific?" "Yes," I had replied, with a calm that had surprised even me. "I need to talk about the sale of my house." Her face had instantly just turned pale, and the coffee mug had trembled slightly in her hand. "Oh, and I also want you to explain to me where all the money came from for that new car, that beach vacation, and all these kitchen renovations that I see you've done." In that very moment I had known that she had known that I had known. And I had also known that the war was just beginning. Jessica had finally let me in, but her whole demeanor had just changed completely. She was no longer the smiling daughter-in-law who would ask for my advice on decorating. Now she was walking ahead of me with these quick, nervous steps, leading me to the living room while she was shouting up to the second floor, "Savannah, you hurry up, or you're going to be late for school." Her voice had just sounded so forced, like she was acting in some poorly rehearsed play. The house was just unrecognizable. Not just because of all the upgrades I had seen in the photos, but because of how they had arranged everything. My eyes had just scanned every single detail. The Italian leather sofa that had to have cost more than my entire 3-month salary. The giant flat-screen television that was now mounted on the wall. The original paintings that I had recognized from an expensive downtown gallery. All of it had been paid for with my money, while they had been telling me that they barely had enough for their basic expenses. "Look, Grace," Jessica had begun, perching on the very edge of that expensive sofa. "I know this might all seem a little confusing, but everything is perfectly legal. The papers you signed." "The papers I signed under false pretenses," I had interrupted, keeping my voice steady, though inside my heart was just beating like a war drum. "The papers I signed believing that it was a temporary loan, not a permanent gift." Her expression had just changed instantly. The mask of fake concern had just fallen away, revealing something that was much colder, much more calculated. "You can't prove that," she had said, crossing her arms. "Your signature is on every single one of those documents. No one forced you to do anything." Just then, Savannah had come down the stairs with her school backpack, and the tension in the room was so thick you could have just cut it with a knife. My granddaughter had looked at both of us, obviously sensing that something was wrong, but not understanding exactly what it was. "Hi, Grandma," she had said, coming over to give me a little kiss on my cheek. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Everything is just perfect," I had replied, hugging her and just breathing in the scent of that strawberry shampoo that always lingered in her hair. "I'm just talking with your mom about some grown-up business." After Savannah had left for school, the conversation had become much more direct. Jessica wasn't pretending anymore. "Look, Grace, the situation is simple. The house is legally ours. You decided to help us out, and that was very generous of you. But now we need to sell it because we have some other plans." "Other plans?" I had asked, feeling the anger just beginning to boil up in my stomach. "Billy Ray got a job opportunity up in Denver. It's a major promotion with a much better salary. We're moving up there next month." She had paused, just studying my reaction. "By selling this house, we'll have enough money to buy something that's even better up there. And we can just start a new life. A new life with my money without ever even consulting me, without even a proper goodbye," I had thought to myself. "And what about me?" I had asked, though I had already known the answer. "You have your own house. You have your own pension. You're well established here. We're young. We have to think about our future, about Savannah's future." Her voice had just sounded as if she were explaining something so obvious to a foolish little child. "You can't just expect us to stay here forever, just because you want to keep the family close." That sentence had just been like a slap in the face. After everything I had done for them, after just handing them my entire life savings, I was the selfish one for wanting to keep our family together. I was the one who didn't understand that they had more important things to do. But what had hurt the most had come next. Jessica had stood up from the sofa and she had walked over to the window, turning her back to me as if I were no longer even important to the conversation. "Besides, Grace, I think it's time you understood that you're not getting any younger. Living all alone at your age can be dangerous. Maybe you should consider moving into a senior living facility, where they can take some proper care of you." The silence that had followed had just been deafening. Me, who had worked until I was 60, who had kept my house immaculate, who had cooked for my whole family every single Sunday, who had tended to my garden and had paid all of my bills on time. Suddenly, I was a helpless old woman who needed to be put in a home. I had risen from the sofa with all the dignity I could muster. "I understand the situation perfectly," I had said, walking toward the door. "You have all made your decisions and now I will make mine." When I had reached the entrance, I had turned around one last time. "Oh, and Jessica, one more thing. This conversation has just clarified a lot for me, especially about the kind of people that you really are." I had left that house for the very last time without ever looking back. But in my mind, the first elements of a plan that they had never seen coming were already beginning to form. That very same afternoon, while they had all thought that I was just at home, crying like some defeated old woman, I was sitting in the office of Arthur Caldwell, the best family law attorney in the city. His office had smelled of old books and strong coffee, and the walls were all covered with diplomas and certificates that just spoke of 40 years of experience, defending some very complicated cases. "Mrs. Miller," he had said, after he had carefully reviewed all the documents that I had brought with me, "this is a classic case of familial financial abuse. Unfortunately, it's a lot more common than most people think." His glasses had just slid down his nose a little bit as he had examined each and every page with the meticulousness of a surgeon. "The good news is we have several legal options." I had explained everything to him. The broken promises, the lies about a temporary loan, the deception with all the documents that I had signed, the expensive upgrades that they had made with the money they had supposedly not had, and especially that morning's conversation, where it had become so clear that everything had just been planned from the very start. "Is there anything that I can do?" I had asked, feeling a small little spark of hope for the very first time in days. Mr. Caldwell had just smiled, in a way that had reminded me of my own father, back when he had had an ace up his sleeve during a game of dominoes. "Ma'am, not only is there something that we can do, there are several things that we are going to do. And all of them are completely legal." He had opened up a new folder and had begun to write some notes quickly. First, we are going to initiate a lawsuit for fraud and undue influence. Second, we are going to request an investigation of all of their recently acquired assets. And third. He had paused, looking at me directly in my eyes with an expression that I couldn't quite interpret. Third what? I had asked. Third, I need you to tell me exactly everything that you can remember about the purchase of that house. Every single detail, every conversation, every promise that they made to you. Because I have a suspicion that there are a lot more irregularities here than what just appears in these papers. For the next 2 hours we had reconstructed the entire story, from the very beginning. Mr. Caldwell had taken constant notes, he had asked some very specific questions, and every so often, he would just raise his eyebrows, as if he had just discovered something important. When I had finished telling him everything, he had leaned back in his chair and he had just sighed. Mrs. Miller, what you've just told me constitutes not only civil fraud, but possibly criminal fraud. Your son and your daughter-in-law could be facing some criminal charges. He had paused, just studying my reaction. Are you prepared to see this through to the very end? For the very first time in months, I had felt completely sure of something. Mr. Caldwell, for 40 years I have worked so hard to save up that money. I have cleaned houses. I have sewn clothes. I have sold my pies. I have deprived myself of vacations and luxuries so that I could have something to leave for my family. If they have decided to steal from me and to treat me like a fool, then they are going to meet the woman that I truly am. That night, following Mr. Caldwell's precise instructions, I had begun my own investigation. I had created some fake social media accounts so that I could see all the content that Billy Ray and Crystal had been posting for the last few months. And what I had discovered had just kept me awake, not from any sadness, but from a pure indignation. Not only had they been showing off the lifestyle that they were living with my money, but they had also been badmouthing me, publicly, in a private Facebook group called Northwood High School Parents. Crystal had posted several derogatory comments about controlling mothers-in-law, and mothers who just don't know when to let their adult children go. In one particularly cruel post she had written, "My mother-in-law thinks that just because she has helped us out financially, she has the right to an opinion on all of our decisions. Some parents just don't understand that their kids are all grown up." But the worst had come when I had found a video that Billy Ray had uploaded to his Instagram just 2 weeks after my birthday. It was a video of him and Crystal, toasting with some expensive champagne in an elegant restaurant. The caption had read, "When you finally break free from toxic family expectations, and can just live your own life. #freedom, #new beginnings, #no more drama." That video had been filmed with my money, at a dinner that had cost more than my entire monthly grocery bill. They were celebrating their freedom from me, after they had just stolen my entire life savings. That night, all alone in my house, I hadn't cried. Instead, I had opened up a bottle of wine that I had been saving for a special occasion. I had poured myself a glass, and I had just toasted myself. To the woman who is about to show them what having more important things to do really means, I had said, out loud, and I had just drunk the wine, savoring every single drop as if it were the very first taste of my new life. The next day Mr. Caldwell had called me early. "Mrs. Miller, I have some news. Some very good news. It turns out that your son and your daughter-in-law have made a very serious mistake. When they registered the property transfer, they did it before the minimum legal waiting period for family-related transfers was even complete," Mr. Caldwell had explained, his voice just sounding like music to my ears. "Technically, the title transfer is voidable until a full 6 months have passed from the original filing." My heart had just begun to beat faster. What does that mean exactly? It means that you, as the original grantor, have the legal right to revoke the transfer and to reclaim the property within the next 48 hours. After that, the current buyer will have acquired their rights. His voice had just grown more serious. "Mrs. Miller, if we are going to act, it has to be right now." I hadn't thought for a single second. "You do it. You do whatever is necessary." The next few hours had just been a whirlwind of paperwork, of signatures, and of phone calls. Mr. Caldwell had pulled some strings at the county recorder's office, at the courthouse, and even with the notary who had authorized the original transfer. By 6 o'clock that evening, the house was legally back in my name. But the real masterstroke had come next. Now, Mr. Caldwell had said, with a smile that would have just made any opposing counsel tremble. We are going to sell this property immediately before they even find out what has happened. I have a client who has been looking for exactly this type of a house, and he is willing to pay $610,000 in cash with the closing tomorrow morning. I hadn't slept that night, not from any anxiety, but from a pure adrenaline. I was experiencing something that I hadn't felt in years, the power of taking control of my own life. While they had been sleeping peacefully in the very house they had thought they had already sold, I was awake, organizing my perfect revenge. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I was back in Mr. Caldwell's office, signing the sale documents. The buyer was a young executive who had needed to relocate, urgently for his work, and he had paid the full price without even haggling. By 10 o'clock that morning, $610,000 were deposited right into my bank account. What's next? I had asked the lawyer, feeling a mixture of triumph and nervousness. Now we just wait, he had replied, carefully filing all the documents into a folder that was marked with my name. The law requires that they be officially notified of the change in ownership. That notice will be arriving at their house this afternoon. I had decided to have lunch at an elegant restaurant downtown, one of those places that I had never even dared to enter because they had always just seemed too expensive. I had ordered the priciest dish on the menu, a bottle of white wine and a dessert. For the very first time in years, I had felt like an important woman, like someone who deserved to be treated with some respect and some consideration. As I was savoring my meal, my phone had begun to vibrate. First, a text from Billy Ray. Mama, we need to talk urgently. You come to the house right now. Then another one. Mama, you answer the phone. And another. This is serious. Something is wrong with the house. I hadn't answered any of them. Instead, I had ordered another coffee and a slice of chocolate cake, and I had just sat there enjoying my lunch while my phone had continued to ring incessantly. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I had had 23 missed calls and 18 text messages, each one more desperate than the last. Mama, please. We have to talk. We don't understand what's happening. The closing agent says we're not the owners anymore. Mama, you answer me, please. Finally, I had decided to answer. Not because I had felt sorry for them, but because I had wanted to hear their voices when they had realized that the foolish, helpless mother they had thought they could just manipulate no longer existed. Hello, Billy Ray, I had said, my voice so calm it had even surprised me. Mama, thank God you've answered. Where are you? We need you to come here right now. There's a huge problem with the house. There's no problem at all, I had replied, taking a little sip of my coffee. The house was sold this morning, just as it was planned. The silence on the other end of the line had been so long, I had thought we had been disconnected. What did you say? He had finally asked in a voice I had barely even recognized. I said the house was sold for $610,000. A good price, don't you think? But Mama, that's our house. We had already sold it. We have a signed contract. You had a signed contract, I had corrected him. But it turns out that that contract was illegal. And since the house legally became mine again, I decided to sell it to whomever I pleased. What had followed had been 10 minutes of shouting, of pleading, of threats, and finally, of the most pathetic crying that I had ever heard in my entire life. Billy Ray, my 35-year-old son, was just sobbing like a 5-year-old because his perfect little plan had just crumbled. When I had hung up the phone, I had just sat there, in that elegant restaurant, surrounded by the murmur of all the other conversations and the soft clinking of the silverware against the plates. And for the very first time in months I had truly just smiled. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I was back at my own house, packing a suitcase with all my essentials. Mr. Caldwell had been very clear. Mrs. Miller, after what we have done today, they are going to try everything to put some pressure on you. I would recommend that you just leave town for a few days, until things cool down. He hadn't needed to tell me twice. I had already booked a room in a small quiet hotel about 3 hours away, in a little mountain town where no one knew me. As I was carefully folding my clothes, I had heard the sound of a car braking sharply, right in front of my house. Through the window I had seen Billy Ray's silver sedan, the one they had bought with my money. The doors had just flown open violently, and out had come Billy Ray and Crystal, followed by Savannah, who had clearly been crying. Their footsteps had just sounded like hammer blows on the concrete walkway as they had approached my door. The banging had started before they could even ring the bell. "Mama! You open this door right now!" Billy Ray had yelled, his voice one that I hadn't heard since he had been a rebellious teenager. "We know you're in there. We need to talk." I hadn't moved from my bedroom. I had just continued packing with these slow, deliberate movements, folding each and every garment as if it were the most important thing in the entire world. Every single pound on that door, every shout, every desperate plea had just confirmed that I had made the right decision. "Grace, please." Now it had been Crystal's voice. But it had no longer sounded like the polite, manipulative daughter-in-law. It had sounded like a woman who was on the very verge of hysteria. "You can't do this. We have our rights. We have a contract with our buyer." Savannah had remained quiet, but I could hear her silent sobs right through the door. That had hurt more than all the shouting combined. But it hadn't been enough to make me change my mind. If my granddaughter was suffering, then it was her parents' fault, not mine. For half an hour, they had continued to knock and to shout and to plead. Billy Ray had gotten to the point of screaming, "Mama, if you don't open up, we're going to have to call the police. This is theft. This is illegal." That's when I had decided to answer them. I had walked to the door without opening it, and I had spoken loudly enough for them to hear me clearly. "Billy Ray, if you want to call the police, then you go right ahead. I have all the legal documents that prove the house was mine, and that the sale you had made was illegal. I also have the proof of all the money that you had spent, which you had claimed you didn't even have." The silence that had followed had just been absolute. Even Savannah had stopped crying for a moment. "Furthermore," I had continued, "if you do call the police, then I'll also have to show them all the screenshots of all the posts where you were bragging about the lifestyle you were living with the money that you had stolen from me, including that lovely little video where you were celebrating being free of me." I had heard Crystal whisper something that had sounded like, "I didn't know she had seen that." And Billy Ray had responded with a word that I will not repeat. "Grandma," Savannah had said in a small broken voice. I didn't know about any of this. Please don't be mad at me." My heart had just broken in two. I had opened the door just a little crack, and I had seen my granddaughter, with her red, swollen eyes, standing there between her parents like a hostage in a war she had never even started. "Sweetheart," I had said, "I could never be mad at you. This is between the adults. You're not to blame for any of this." That's when Billy Ray had completely just lost his control. "You stop manipulating my daughter. You're the one who's destroying this family. All we ever did was for our future." "Your future?" I had asked, opening the door completely and just looking him right in his eyes for the very first time in days. "Your future built on lies, on theft, and on disrespect for the very woman who gave you your life? Is that the future that you want?" Crystal had stepped forward, with an expression that had tried to be threatening, but that had only just managed to look desperate. "Grace, you just don't understand the consequences of what you have done. We had already committed that money. We have debts to pay. We have the job in Denver that's just waiting for us." "That's not my problem," I had replied, with a coldness that had even surprised me. "You made your plans without ever consulting me. You spent money that wasn't yours. And you lied to me for months. Now you can just face the consequences." Billy Ray had looked at me with an expression that had mixed fury and disbelief, and something that it had taken me a moment to even recognize, fear. "Mama, are you really going to destroy your own family over some money?" "I didn't destroy anything," I had responded. "You destroyed the trust. You destroyed the respect. You destroyed the love that I had for this family when you decided to treat me like a fool. I am just picking up the pieces of my own dignity." I had left them all standing there in my yard, and I had just closed the door. I had finished my packing, I had called a cab, and I had left my own house without ever looking back. In the taxi, watching my neighborhood, my house, my previous life just fade away through the window, I had felt like a butterfly that had just emerged from its chrysalis. The little hotel in the mountains was exactly what I had needed. It was small, and it was quiet, and it had a spectacular view of the valley, and a staff that had asked me no questions. My room had had a little balcony with 2 wicker chairs and a small table, where I could have my morning coffee while I was looking out at a landscape that just seemed to have been taken right from a postcard. For the very first time in months, I was in no hurry to do anything. I didn't have to cook for anyone but myself. I didn't have to worry about the needs of others. For the first 2 days my phone had never stopped ringing. 51 missed calls on the first day, and 37 on the second. The messages had become increasingly dramatic and desperate. Billy Ray had gone from fury to pleading and finally to some veiled threats. Crystal had alternated between these fake apologies and some direct attacks on my character. But there had been other messages too from some numbers that I didn't even recognize. On the third day, I had decided to read some of those unknown messages. One of them had just made my blood run cold. Mrs. Miller, this is Attorney Fernandez, the legal representative for the Herrera family. My client is very interested in reaching an out-of-court settlement regarding the property issue. Please contact me urgently. Another one had said, Mrs. Miller, we are a media company. We would like to interview you about the family conflict that has now gone viral on social media. We can offer you some financial compensation for your testimony. Viral on social media? My heart had just begun to pound. I had opened up Facebook and Instagram on my phone, and I had searched for Crystal's name, and what I had found had just taken my breath away. She had posted a 40-minute-long video on her Facebook page with the title, When a Mother Destroys Her Own Family Over Some Money. In the video, Crystal had appeared crying dramatically with Savannah right beside her, who was also crying, and she was telling a completely distorted version of the events. According to her story, I was a greedy old woman who had manipulated some legal documents just to steal their house, after they had generously included me in the purchase. My mother-in-law forced us to put the house in her name because she said that we'd get better credit terms that way, Crystal had said between some theatrical sobs. We just trusted her because she's family. We paid for everything with our own savings. We worked day and night on all the renovations. And now, she just says that the house was hers, and she has sold it without even telling us. The video had had over 50,000 views and hundreds of comments, most of them supporting Crystal and just condemning me as a toxic mother-in-law and an abusive old woman. They had managed to paint me as the villain of the whole story, as a cruel woman who had just destroyed a young family out of a pure malice. But what had hurt the most was seeing Savannah in that video, my own granddaughter, her eyes all swollen from crying and saying between her little whimpers, "My grandma was always so good to me. I don't understand why she's doing this. We just want our house back, so we can move to Denver like we had all planned." The video had been shared thousands of times, and it had already reached the local radio shows and all the gossip blogs. In the comments, people were speculating about my mental state, and they were suggesting that I must be senile or manipulated by some third parties. And some of them had even proposed starting a collection to help this poor family that had been victimized by some elder abuse. I had gotten out of the hotel bed and I had just walked out to the balcony. The cool mountain air had helped to calm me down and to think a little more clearly. I had immediately called Mr. Caldwell. "Mrs. Miller, several of the media outlets have already contacted me about this case," he had said, before I could even explain what I had seen. "I would recommend that you make no public statement for now. They are just playing the victim card. But we have something that is much better, the documented truth." "What do you mean?" I had asked, suddenly just feeling so very tired. "I mean, I have all the proof of what really happened. The original documents, where it's clearly established that you were the sole owner. All the screenshots of all of their posts where they were bragging about all of their spending. The exact dates that prove they had been lying about their income. And something else that I had just discovered yesterday." "What else?" "Your son and your daughter-in-law had applied for a $75,000 bank loan, using the house as collateral, just 3 days before they had sold it to the first buyer. Technically, they were committing bank fraud in addition to defrauding you. That information had just changed everything. This was no longer just a family dispute. It was a fraud case that could have some very serious criminal consequences." "Mr. Caldwell," I had said, feeling a strange kind of a calm just wash over me, "I think it's time for the truth to come out." "Are you sure? Once we initiate the full legal process, there's just no going back." I had looked out at the valley from my balcony, where the afternoon sun was just painting the mountains in these beautiful shades of gold, and I had thought about all the years that I had worked in silence, that I had sacrificed in silence, that I had loved in silence. The time had come for my voice to be heard. "I'm sure," I had replied. "You just do whatever is necessary." 3 months later, I was sitting on the terrace of my new house, in a small little coastal town, about 4 hours away from my old life, and I was watching the sunrise over the ocean while I was having my morning coffee. The house was small, but it was just perfect. It had 2 bedrooms, a little kitchen with a window that was overlooking the sea, and a garden where I had planted some roses and some lavender and some herbs. I had bought it with the money from the sale, and I still had enough left over to live comfortably for many, many years. The legal process had ended the previous week. Billy Ray and Crystal had faced some charges for bank fraud, and they had been sentenced to pay a substantial fine and to perform some community service. The job in Denver had just vanished when the company had learned of the legal scandal. Crystal's viral video had been taken down after Mr. Caldwell had presented the real evidence, and several of the media outlets that had run the story had had to issue some retractions. But my victory wasn't something that was shouted from the rooftops, or that was celebrated with a big fanfare. It was lived in silence, as a true victory should be. Savannah had sent me a letter 2 weeks ago. It was a 6-page, handwritten letter, and she was asking for my forgiveness for having participated in that video without knowing the whole truth. "Grandma," she had written in her careful teenage script, "I understand now that my parents had been lying to me about a lot of things. I didn't know that you had paid for the house completely. I didn't know that they had tricked you with all the documents. I didn't know that they had been spending all of your money on all those unnecessary things. I just feel so terrible for having appeared in that video, saying all those things that just weren't true." The letter had gone on to explain that she had decided to go and live with her aunt, Norma, Crystal's sister, because she just couldn't stand the toxic atmosphere at home anymore. "My parents won't stop fighting and blaming each other, and blaming you for everything that's happening to them. But I know that they are the ones who got themselves into this mess." At the end of the letter, Savannah had written, "I know that you probably don't want to have anything to do with this family anymore, and I would completely understand. But if you ever do forgive me and you want to see me, I'll be waiting. I love you, Grandma, and I'm so sorry for everything that we have put you through." That letter had made me cry for the very first time in months. But not from any sadness, but from a relief. My granddaughter, the only innocent person in this whole story, had managed to see the truth for herself. I had replied immediately, and I had invited her to come and visit me at my new house during her summer vacation. I had wanted to show her my garden, to cook with her in my new kitchen, to walk along the beach together at sunset. I had wanted to show her that a true love can survive all the lies and the manipulation. Billy Ray had never apologized. In the last messages that he had sent me before I had changed my phone number, he had continued to just blame me for destroying the family, and for being a selfish mother. Crystal had tried to contact me through social media with all these messages that had just alternated between these dramatic apologies and some veiled threats. I had just blocked all of her profiles. I hadn't felt any hatred toward them. That had been the most surprising part of this whole process. Discovering that after all the pain and the betrayal, what I had felt for my own son and my daughter-in-law wasn't any hatred, but a kind of a quiet indifference. They had just shown themselves to be people that I couldn't trust. People who were willing to hurt someone who had loved them, for some money and some convenience. And when you know someone's true nature, you just can no longer love them in the same way. I had finished my coffee and I had gotten up to water the plants in my garden. The roses had just started to bloom, and the scent of the lavender was just mixing with the salty sea breeze. As I was watering each plant carefully, I had thought about the woman I had been just 6 months ago. Invisible, accommodating, always ready to sacrifice for a family that had just taken her for granted. That woman no longer existed. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, who had reclaimed her own dignity, who had learned that a self-love is more important than the approval of others. A woman who had discovered that sometimes, to save what really matters, you just have to have the courage to leave everything behind. That afternoon, as I was preparing my dinner in my kitchen with a view of the sea, the doorbell had rung. It had been the mail carrier with a small little package for me. There had been no return address, but I had recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Savannah. Inside was a framed photo of the two of us that had been taken on my birthday the previous year, when everything had still seemed normal and happy. On the back, in her neat handwriting, she had written, "For the bravest grandma in the entire world. Thank you for teaching me that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's survival." I had placed the photo on the kitchen windowsill, where I could see it while I was cooking. Then I had turned on the radio, I had put on some soft music, and I had continued preparing my dinner. Alone but not empty. At peace after the storm. That night, before I had gone to sleep, I had opened my bedroom windows just to listen to the sound of the waves against the shore. For the very first time in years, I had fallen asleep without any worries, without any anxiety, without any fear. I had won something that was much more valuable than any money or any property. I had gotten my life back. 2 years later, the sound of the doorbell at my little seaside home no longer startled me. I had learned to enjoy all the unexpected visits. The fisherman who would come by every Tuesday, Mrs. Gable from 2 houses down who had now become my tea-time companion, or the neighborhood kids who would come to ask for some oranges from my tree. But that Saturday morning when I had opened the door, I had found a surprise that had just taken my breath away. Savannah was standing on my doorstep, but she was no longer the confused, hurt teenager who had visited me during her vacations. She was a young woman of 18, with a radiant smile and a suitcase in her hand. "Hi, Grandma," she had said, and her voice had just sounded so different, more mature, more confident. "I've come to ask you a very big favor." I had let her in and I had made us some coffee while she had settled herself on the living room sofa, the same place where we had spent so many hours during her previous visits, just talking about life, about her parents' mistakes, about her dreams of studying veterinary medicine and of working with all the marine animals. "I got a full scholarship to study marine biology at the state university," she had told me, her eyes just shining with an excitement. "It's everything that I have ever wanted, Grandma. But the campus is only about an hour from here, and I was just wondering if I could maybe stay with you while I'm studying. I promise I won't be a bother. I can help out with all the expenses, I can work on the weekends. I can cook, I can clean." I hadn't let her finish. I had stood up from my chair and I had just hugged her with a strength that had even surprised me. "Sweetheart," I had said, feeling the tears just welling up in my eyes. "This house just feels so empty without you. Of course you can stay." That afternoon, as I was helping Savannah to unpack her things in the guest room that had been waiting for her for 2 whole years, she had told me about her life with her aunt, Norma. She had told me how she had graduated from high school with excellent grades, how she had worked part-time at a vet clinic just to save up some money, and something that had just broken my heart. She hadn't spoken to her own parents in over a year. After everything had happened, they had tried to manipulate me into helping them to get some money from you, she had explained, while she was hanging her clothes up in the closet. "They had asked me to write you all these letters, asking you to give them a second chance, to loan them some money for some new business." She had just sat down on the bed and she had looked at me with a sadness that I hadn't seen in her eyes in a very long time. When I had refused, they had just started treating me like I was the enemy. "Grandma, do you think I'm a bad person for not wanting to have a relationship with my own parents?" I had sat down next to her and I had just taken her hands in mine. "My dear," I had said, "sometimes the families that we choose are more important than the families that we are born into. You chose honesty over a blind loyalty. You chose your own future over their manipulation. That doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a strong one." That night, I had made a special dinner to celebrate Savannah's living with me. As we were cooking together in my little kitchen, I had realized something so beautiful. During the 2 years that I had lived all alone, I had learned to be happy just by myself. But having Savannah back didn't make me feel dependent or needy. It had just made me feel complete in a different kind of a way. Like when you are sharing something good that you already possess, not when you're just looking for something that you lack. During our dinner, Savannah had told me about all of her academic plans, her dreams of working in marine conservation, her hopes of making a real difference in the world. I had just listened to her with the same admiration that I had felt when she was just a little girl, telling me about all the books that she was reading. But now her passion had a direction and a purpose. "Grandma," she had said as we were washing the dishes together, "there's something that I have never told you, but I think about it every single day." "What is it, sweetheart?" "Thank you for teaching me that it's okay to say no, that it's okay to set your own boundaries, That it's okay to just walk away from people who are hurting you, even if they're your own family. She had paused, carefully drying a plate before she had continued. If I hadn't seen how you had defended yourself, I don't think I ever would have had the courage to get away from my own parents when they had started being so toxic with me, too. That night, after Savannah had gone to bed, I had gone out to the terrace with a cup of chamomile tea and I had just sat there, watching the ocean under the full moon. The sound of the waves was my favorite music now. A constant symphony just reminding me that life, just like the sea, is always in motion, always changing, always offering some new possibilities. I had thought about the woman I had been just 4 years ago, sitting at that empty birthday table, waiting for a family that had never come. That woman had been broken by a betrayal. But from that very fracture, someone entirely new had been born. A woman who knew that a true love does not require the sacrifice of one's own dignity. That healthy relationships are built on a mutual respect, not on a familial obligation. My phone had vibrated with a text. It had been from Mrs. Gable, my neighbor, who had seen Savannah arrive that morning. So happy to see your granddaughter is back. I'll bring over a cake tomorrow to celebrate. It's so beautiful to see a family that truly loves each other. A family that truly loves each other. Those words had just resonated in my mind as I had finished my tea. For years, I had believed that loving your family had meant just putting up with anything, forgiving any kind of abuse and sacrificing anything just to maintain a unity. Now I knew that a true love requires boundaries and respect, and the courage to just walk away when it is necessary. Savannah and I were a small family, but we were a real one. A family that was built on a mutual choice, on a genuine affection, and on the shared desire to just grow and to be better people. We didn't need anyone else to be complete. Before I had gone inside, I had taken one last look at the ocean. Tomorrow a new chapter would begin. Being the grandmother who supports her granddaughter's dreams. The woman who had found her peace after the storm. The person who had learned that sometimes to save what really matters, you just have to have the courage to leave it all behind. And for the very first time in my entire life, I wasn't afraid of the future.